Hey budget nerds! Today we'll go over something not done on the channel before, and as you already know, it's a 3D printer. I've been pretty fascinated by the technology for a while, and this may not come as a surprise. I've been waiting for prices to come down. This one comes in between $200 and $240. Let's jump in and see if it's a good place to start. Meet the XVico X3S. XVico, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right. Send it over for review, and as always, I'll tell it like it is. For features, it runs on open source software, has a touch screen, which is pretty cool. It also has a heated bed, a filament detector to stop and resume prints if you run out of filament, and it will resume prints if your power gets cut. It will max out at 265 degrees Celsius at the extruder, also known as the nozzle bit, where the plastic oozes out. The printable space is 220 by 220 by 240 millimeters. The nozzle diameter is a common 0.4 of a millimeter, and it will accept 1.75 millimeter filament. For the price, the features are actually pretty good. Here are some more specs for the incredibly nerdy. Putting it together was also pretty easy. It comes mostly assembled, and that's great for beginners like me. I only needed to screw on the upright section with 4 screws and then attach the connectors where they need to go. The instructions were pretty good at showing what went where. Make sure you get all the little things out of the frame and cut the straps that hold the belts. Once set up, it looks pretty legit. Let's take it into the garage and get our nerd on. When you turn it on, you're greeted with 3 icons. Tool lets you preheat the extruder or bed. Extruder lets you change extruder settings. Move lets you manually move the axes around. Home lets you send certain axes to 0. And leveling lets you level the bed. Settings lets you change the language, adjust the fan, and that's mostly it. Printer lets you browse the included microSD card and select a file to print. It's a good idea to calibrate or level the bed first, and for that I used a piece of paper. Let it go to each corner and adjust the bed until there is some drag on the paper between the nozzle and the bed. The manual goes over how it's done. For my first print, I picked a model that came on the SD card. Turns out it's a barrel. Nice. It turned out okay, but there are a few lines in the wall, also a tiny spot on the top. Turns out this is more or less burnt plastic that gets on the nozzle and then eventually drips onto the model. I'm not sure if this is common on all 3D printers, but as long as you keep the nozzle clean, it's not an issue. If you didn't keep it clean, this plastic would drip down on a bad spot, harden, and then snap the print off the bed when the nozzle came back around. This was rare. Most of the time it just discolored the model in spots. The lines on the barrel can be sorted out by adjusting the tension on the horizontal belt. I saw the installation manual claims you should use Cura as your slicer. I downloaded it and had a few issues. Turns out the version of Cura they want you to use is included on the microSD card. It's an older version, 14.07 to be precise. The manual shows you how to set it up and what settings to use. It works well, but I can't help but feeling a little silly using old software. If you know what you're doing, you could recreate the settings in new Cura and probably have success, but most beginners like me may just stick with this for now. It is a minor negative for me. XVico, please get this printer working in the newest version of Cura. That aside, it totally gets the job done. I had a few issues with the first layer not sticking, and some issues with the flow not being consistent in the beginning before it started printing. I just adjusted the first layer, speed and thickness, as well as the distance between the bed and the nozzle, and lastly, I added a skirt to help get the flow right before actually starting the model. It all made a pretty big difference. What I've learned so far is you need to tweak with some things to get it just right. Once dialed in, this thing started printing pretty well. Then, I started to have fun.
Bit of a goatee going on.
My kids and I started digging around Thingiverse and started printing all sorts of things. Llama cookie cutters, to unicorns, to Pokemon, and even Zelda characters. Link turned out a bit rough, but after adjusting the supports, they started coming out great. I even printed out the obligatory tugboat, and it turned out pretty good. The bottom wasn't superb, but after more tweaks I've since made, I think it would do better. I also printed another boat with a 0.5mm layer height, and it turned out a bit rough. So the printer can handle that setting, but prints may not turn out how you want. I found that 1.5 was a sweet spot for height. Even the Cali Cat that I printed turned out great. This printer will resume its print if the power is cut. To test this, I started a print and cut the power.
Cutting power now. Okay, definitely no power. Yeah, completely off. Let's turn it back on and see what it does.
It asked if I wanted to resume when I restored the power. I said yes, and it finished. I didn't test any other filaments, but it claims it will handle other types. As far as negatives, there is a list, but they're all fairly minor. I wish the manual was better. The manual to set up the printer and software was actually pretty good, but the operator's manual was pretty basic. Speaking of the manual, it mentions that you could oil the rails if some of the axes start to vibrate, which they did. I'm glad they mentioned this, and I'm not sure if this is common with all 3D printers, but it didn't look or sound great. It didn't seem to affect the prints though. As mentioned, I wish the printer was set up out of the box to work with the newest Cura software. After some use, the fan would be very noisy on startup, but would eventually quiet down. This is common of cheap fans. Also, after lightly cleaning the screen with a very, very lightly dampened cloth, the screen started to freak out on me a bit. I'm in IT, I'm not a moron. We're talking about the smallest amount of dampness, and it still hated me afterwards. It wouldn't register touches in the correct spot, and would register false touches. To XVico's credit, their support was great, and even they agreed to send out another screen, but it did eventually snap out of it, and again works just fine. Another thing I didn't care for, but was pretty minor, was the nozzle would ooze when heating up. Maybe this is common, again, of 3D printers, or lower cost printers. Melting plastic accumulating on the nozzle and dripping on the prints was also annoying, but again, might be something that affects all printers. Preheating the nozzle and cleaning before your prints would solve this. All in all, I do like the printer. It's great fun. It does compete with the Creality Ender 3, which comes in around $200. Price-wise, this printer comes in just above that. You do get a touchscreen, filament detector, and a heated bed, which are all pluses, but I think there are still things that could be improved on this printer. I haven't used the Ender 3, so I can't compare them, but the closer to $200 you can find an XVico X3S, the more compelling it becomes. I think this printer is pretty solid where it counts, with the only real exception being the touchscreen issue I had. If you do clean the screen, use caution. I'm pretty new to the hobby, but from what I can tell, the XVico X3S seems to be a pretty good option. Do your research and consider the options, but it's hard to go wrong with this one if you're looking to get into the hobby. One thing I know for sure is I had quite a lot of fun with it. Well, let me know if there are questions or tips you can give in the comments. Thanks for watching.